Good evening and welcome. I am Brown Girl Interacting, or Maria, and I am coming to you live from a new space because today is one day where there is a lot going on. Particularly in one is that I am existing right now in half of a house of electricity, and so this is where we are. And I offer you some grace throughout today's show because there may or may not be some lags here and there. There might be some sound and technical issues, but we are going to hopefully make all this work as best we can. And we are so glad to have you here. And the quote I'm going to start with is right behind me here from my daughter. Nothing will be perfect, but everything will be special. And that is kind of how life has been lately. Nothing is perfect, but everything is special. And I know I haven't been around for a while and you haven't seen me, but I'm back and I'm excited because I am here to have a conversation. And so today I am bringing a really special person to the floor soon who I met through a common friend randomly as brown girls are introduced to each other, and she was a brown girl introduced to me. But I was taken by her story of pain to power, which she may not have realized how I was taking notes, but I was, of just how she's navigated motherhood through some really big challenges and what she's done with that to lead with love. So I'm very excited to introduce to you my guest, who is Amrita Sareen, and she is the founder of Better Ed. And I'm just going to let you take it away. Welcome, Amrita.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me, Maria. Really appreciate being here with you this
Well,
evening.
I am truly so happy to have you here, because as I was saying, we met through a common friend who also actually was my first interview myself, Poonam Maluksha, who has the show Live Your Best DC. You also check her out on YouTube. Make sure you do. And she introduced us. And inadvertently, we started to share stories. And Amrita, your story is really powerful to me. Like, I think that what I learned from just talking to you for a few moments is you have an amazing amount of resilience in life, and you have taken your pain and turned it into power. And that's really what I would love to share with the world, because that's what this is about. It's about sharing all the different ways we heal and heal others. So I'm just going to let you take the floor first and tell a little bit about to the audience who you are, your background, some kind of what you do.
Sure. So just a quick one-on-one on me. I'm an Indian American brown girl, raised within the Sikh faith. My parents immigrated to the U.S., and I have two older siblings who were born in India. I unexpectedly arrived here. My parents, did not plan on having me, and I came. We were raised in Brooklyn. Later on we moved to Long Island. Like many immigrants, my parents worked so hard. And even though we didn't have much, neither my siblings nor myself ever felt we lacked anything. Um, and I just mentioned that because so much of my strength, my core, is due to my parents. I have to give them credit for that. And largely due to the stability of their relationship. They're just yin and yang and they work. And because of that is why I think myself, my siblings, have the stability that we do. Outside of that, I spent the majority of my career on Wall Street in finance in New York. And now it feels like I live in the country in Bethesda with my husband and two kids, and one more on the way in literally less than a month. So,
Wow.
in a nutshell.
And that's a lot, and we're going to unpack it a little bit more. That's the nutshell, but there's so many layers to all of that.
Yeah.
And I again love sharing the dynamics of the brown girl story because they're all so different. So thank you for offering your story to be able to learn a little bit more about it. But so the show is called Pain to Power, and that's really what I want to know more about because I think everyone looks at that idea differently. Like you really talked about an interesting trajectory from Brooklyn to the suburbs of Bethesda, but also of the being a daughter of immigrants and what that experience was. So, in all of these different experiences of your life, how would you say you capture that idea of pain to power for yourself? What does that mean?
Well, thinking about your show, right, and how my story and why you wanted me to come on to share this idea of pain to power. I never really thought about my journey that way, right? Because if you think about it as a mom, when there are tough times as it relates to your children, you never think about your own pain, right? You think about their pain. You think about what they're going through. Maybe as a wife, you also think about your spouse and the pain that they're going through, but never really about you, right? Because that's just not what moms do, right? For me, despite the challenges I've faced, I remind myself, and frankly, I've been reminded that it could always be worse. For me, the glass is always half full. I live like that. That's partly because of my parents and their values. Um, but it's funny because, as I was watching some of your shows before coming on, and you always talk about leading with love. That resonates so much with me because that's motherhood, right? I mean, for me at least, almost anything we do as mom is because we're leading with love. And if we want to make a positive impact, a true impact, we have to lead with love. It has to come from a place of love, not anger or resentment or frustration, but love. So I think it's interesting, the pain to power versus leading with love, although it is connected.
But as you're able to frame it that way, because I think that everything resonates with everybody differently, right? And that's not something anyone's necessarily said on the show. So I appreciate that. It's all different perspectives, and that's really what this is about. Is it's sharing those perspectives. And motherhood. Motherhood is that is, there's a lot there, right? And it is it is that we are taking on our children's pain, and sometimes but so thinking about that and talking about that, I'd love to know a little bit more, because why I brought you on, and what really struck me when we were talking the first time, is that your parenting journey has had a lot of unexpected challenges, that and I guess when I say pain to power, I just want to clarify, right? Like, I think for me, it's not always that we feel pain as much as that life is sometimes in itself filled with different challenges, right? And those can cause pain for the people we love or for ourselves. So in that way, your story of parenting.
Right. Well, that's totally fair. So just to give you guys a quick background, gosh, I'm a New Yorker through and through, if you haven't figured that part out yet. Both my kids were born in New York. We were living in New York. It was the fall of 2018. I had a 3.5-year-old daughter. My son was about to turn 1 next month, and my husband's work was bringing him back to the Bethesda area because and that's where he grew up. I was consulting at the time, so I had the flexibility to move, even though I didn't want to move. We did. But right before leaving New York, our pediatrician at the time said, your son's kind of not meeting some of the developmental milestones he should be by now. So once you kind of get settled into DC, maybe, have a developmental pediatrician take a look at him. There was no real urgency in her voice, so we didn't really think much of it. We settled in. Early 19, we saw a geneticist who wanted to do a metabolic workup and blood work on our son. And then, Maria, we got that call. Every parent's worst nightmare. The results are in. We need to talk to you. Can you come in tomorrow? Can you bring someone with you for support? You can't give someone a cliffhanger like that and expect me to, wait a night, right, to talk to you. And I don't think of myself as a pushy person, but that Brooklynite, the mama bear inside me came out and made her share the results over the phone. We were effectively told that our son had a neurodegenerative condition And a likely outcome would be that he'd be feeding out of a tube and losing most of his motor skills by the age of 4. And many with his diagnosis did not survive past the age of 10. I don't believe hell exists, but if it did exist, this is what purgatory must be like. Um, there were things on this report that didn't make sense, but this one geneticist was adamant about the diagnosis. Well, after about a month of just sheer agony and a fair bit of pushing from our end, we received a second opinion, and we were told that the pathologist made a mistake and that the initial results were misinterpreted. I've never been so grateful for human error in my entire life. We eventually found out that my son does have a rare syndrome. We were able to verify that genetically. And after everything we had just been through, we were just grateful that this was a relatively more benign diagnosis, right? It wasn't life or death. And I share all this because, in your darkest hour, you find every bit of strength you have from your support system. If it wasn't for my parents, frankly, both our families, their support, our collective resources, frankly, knowing how to challenge the system in this country, that whole experience would have been much harder and likely more drawn out. I think about, my parents as immigrants, and I imagine being new to this country, not speaking the language well, and then dealing with something like that, right? How to navigate the system. I'm lucky, growing up in the projects of Brooklyn came in handy. Eventually I had to quit my job and focus on the kids and all the therapies that my son needed. I never thought I would not be working, like a corporate job. I worked all throughout high school, college. I was always financially independent. And now I'm a housewife. There's nothing wrong with being a housewife. I have a lot of respect for women who are housewives. I just never thought I'd find myself in that position.
But wow. Thank you. I appreciate your ability, Amrita, because I think to share that as a parent, share that moment that I can imagine, right? Both those phone calls, the first one, I can't even imagine, right? But then to get at some better, something give you some ease, to give you a little bit of peace, but it still sounds like what you had to navigate has been something unexpected in parenting, which parenting is filled with unexpected, but I think you're speaking to things that a lot of parents don't always withstand through. And I appreciate that you mentioned the idea of just having that privilege and opportunity of being able to understand the system, because that certainly makes a difference. But at the same time, I think you also you experience something that is not the norm for everyone, right? And I want to know and understand for you personally, and this is that pain to power piece for me, is that how was that? Because you changed your life, like you said. I mean, there's nothing wrong with I think everybody makes different life choices, but when your life choices aren't made for you, or you don't make them, but they're made for you, right? It's a different experience of how you move through that. So can you tell me just a little bit more, and the audience, of what you talked about the support system. What about for you personally, in your own mindset, in your own understanding of things, helped you to be able to transition from this world of businesswoman, Wall Street, to now all of my and everything is on my children, and this navigation of something that is so different than you've ever experienced before?
It's funny because I'm still going through it, right? Growing up, I never actually wanted kids. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, especially there's a lot of people out there who are trying to have kids or whatever, but I just never saw myself with a family. I think I was just too selfish. And you're right, I joke that I traded in my sexy stilettos for a pair of grubby old sneakers. I mean, I have a whole suitcase and closet full of like cute work clothes and I wear Lululemons all the time now. And it's, it's just completely different. How do you not lose yourself, right? And that identity. And, I do believe in that we need to be, all need to be a little bit selfish. You need to be happy, because if you're not happy, no one else around you is going to be happy. You can't make anyone happy unless you find that peace and happiness within. There's no guidebook to parenting, let alone when your son has a syndrome. Right? At first, there's a lot of guilt. And to be clear, this is a lot of self-inflicted guilt, right? Am I doing enough? Am I spending too much? Am I too focused on therapy and not being mom in the traditional sense? What about my daughter? Also, my husband's pretty athletic. He's never said anything to me, but the chances of his son playing basketball or football in that traditional sense is probably going to be remote, and you take that on. I think women do that, more than men do. We just, what's the opposite of projecting? We just take it upon us. We kind of, what was that?
Absorb.
There you go. Right. And then just thinking about there's a whole, you talk about identity and complexity, and there's a whole another layer of identity for my son here. When do I tell him that you have this, or, to explain it to my daughter, when is it too early? When is it too, so all those things kind of go in my head. And then I think about all that first. And then there's the Amrita part too, right? Where's Amrita, and how's Amrita fit into all this? But kind of going back to the mom side for a sec, well, some moms were spending, mommy and me time with their 18-month-old kids. I was taking my son to physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, special educators. I mean, in some ways I felt like an Uber driver, but again, to your point, I couldn't complain. I mean, there are a lot of good therapists, in my opinion, especially around here, that don't take any insurance. So I certainly recognize my privilege of not having to work, not being able to spend time with my kid, right? I mean, we had the luxury of that, affording these therapies. And it's still hard because I don't want to lose myself. But I remember looking in the mirror once, and I'm like, where's the girl who used to live abroad? I lived in Hong Kong, I lived in Sydney, I lived in Geneva. On a few occasions, I'd buy my ticket at the airport, jet set, and go somewhere for the weekend, right? And it's humbling. It's really humbling. There's victories that I have, especially in the beginning with my son. So for example, people rejoice when their kids have their first word. The first word is usually around 10 months or a year or whatever. I was so happy when my son was almost 2 and he said, It's hard to explain to people that something like that may sound so trivial, but I know how hard my son was working. I know how much we pushed him. And he said, for an M&M. That was huge. I couldn't share that with anybody per se. But, a side note to that, the contrast, the old me, back in the day, what made my day was when I was working in finance and closing the deal, making maybe 6 or 7 figures for the bank. That contrast, that night and day, it really puts life in perspective and what's important. I was living in downtown Manhattan when 9/11 happened. Even that didn't put my life as much in perspective as my experience with my son, and what's important at the end of the day. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I kind of.
Yeah, I think you, because I think that it sounds like what you've been balancing and figuring out is this perspective,
Right.
and the humbling of it, but also the recognition of where you stand within it, and that's honest. Like, I think that that's all it is, right? We go through things in life, is all we can be is honest. We can show up as ourselves authentically, even if that authentic shift has to happen, right? From stilettos to yoga pants is a real thing, right? It's a real thing. And you look sexy and fabulous in your yoga pants too. We make it work. And motherhood, right?
Right.
We make it work. And I think that, that's the beauty of it, is that everybody's journey is so different and everybody is making it work in so many different ways, and you're finding your support system through that, it sounds like, as well. So I do have a question, like, because I'm wondering, you talked about your family as your support system, but and thank you for sharing your story. Thank you, Jaw Logic. And I have to say a shout out to my producer who is making this crazy technical day work so well and flow. Also a New Yorker, so hopefully y'all connected on that as well.
Mhm.
And but I think, um, I would wonder, and I wonder for you, were you able to find like-minded families or parents or adults to be able to kind of create some of that village of collective understanding? Because it is, my story is not the same, but I will say that I got pregnant well before where all my peers were in college and living a college life. And I remember just being a mother by itself and not having friends who were also in that space was difficult. So just thinking about that on the level of what you've had to manage, and think about what was your community? What was it that, who were the people that you were able to find any of that connection through?
I want to get to that in just a second, but when we talk about family, I need to say this because um, when we talk about motherhood and your journey as a woman in something like this, I was always Daddy's little girl. My dad and I have very similar personalities. My mother and I, we butted heads throughout my childhood and probably most of my adult life. My mom was just a tough woman. She's fierce. Um, and, kind of looking back, growing up, Dad worked so much, to feed us, to shelter us. It was really my mom that was the glue to the family. And it's embarrassing to admit, but when I had my daughter is when I finally started seeing my mother, if that makes any sense.
Entirely.
What she sacrificed, how hard she worked. It's empowering when you realize the strength within. And I finally saw my mother's strength, my grandmother, who was actually very close to her strength. I mean, they both had their share of struggles and hardships, but they never dwelled on frustration or self-pity. What would be the point, right? And more importantly, they had faith. I mentioned that I grew up in the Sikh faith, and I'm not particularly religious, but there are words from the Sikh scriptures that really resonate with me. Can I share a little bit, if that's okay? Oh, yeah. So there's a line in the holy book that says, "Duk daro sukropya jasukta nahoy." Duk means sadness or suffering. Sukh is like peace or blessing. Suffering is a blessing in disguise, because when you suffer, you think about God and you seek His grace. And suffering teaches us endurance, perseverance, and humility. So going back to community now, I met so many, and I've continued to meet so many incredible people on this journey, women on this journey. I've been so humbled, Maria, and so blessed. I don't even know where to begin. One thing I craved when we moved here, right? I mean, I kind of just left my life in a sense in New York, was community. I was lonely, right? And then you get a diagnosis like this, and it's even more, you feel even more lonely, right? Because now it's not the typical motherhood experience. It's a little different. And my husband and I channel our emotions differently. So I ended up meeting a lot of interesting people. A few examples actually to share. I reconnected with a couple friend of ours who started their own nonprofit related to their son's diagnosis. His condition is so rare that there's less than 100 known cases globally. So they started this foundation to build a community around the syndrome so that they can learn from one another. I met another woman whose daughter also has a rare condition. She ended up suing the Board of Education of New York because they weren't providing the accommodations needed for her right for an education. And yet another couple who started their own biotech company to find drugs that might help regulate their kids' condition. Because frankly, all of our kids' conditions, they're all kind of rare. Big pharma don't care about these rare conditions because there's not much dollar and cents behind them. So these parents have to advocate. They have to fight. I found my strength in their stories. They were all obviously a few years ahead of me in terms of what they knew about their kids and the diagnosis. The last thing I'd like to share is we've been going to the same physical therapy practice since we moved here for my son. And the space is somewhat open. So if my son's on the treadmill with his therapist, you'll see other kids and their therapists doing another activity. I've met parents at this practice whose kids do have degenerative conditions. So the therapy is just there to prolong the inevitable impact of their diagnosis. I don't know if I'd have their strength and stamina. I look at them and, day in and day out, they're fighting and fighting to keep going for their kid. And I'm in complete awe of their tenacity, of their strength. So yeah, I've really met some just incredible people on this journey. Again, I've been blessed. Like I wouldn't have met them if this hadn't happened to me. So there's always a silver lining.
Wow. And I think I appreciate everything you just shared. First of all, the scripture that you just shared, and I know if we can throw that chat, the comment back up there, bars from the Holy Book. I was saying like that's the original Pain to Power, right? That is it. Finding that peace in the struggle itself, right? The power in it, and that it gives us, right? And then going back to you said you found strength in the stories of others, right? But I appreciate one that like I have to just say honestly, like your humility and your grace and the way that you are so willing to kind of not you've done a lot. I feel like you don't want the spotlight, you don't want the awards and the rewards, and I get that honestly because I think that's a cultural thing. I would say I've struggled with that a lot in my life. We've been taught in many ways as South Asian women particularly to not think of ourselves, not put ourselves as up on any kind of level of success, right? We sit in humility as a way of not recognizing our own strength sometimes. But I'm grateful that you're recognizing your own strength in this space right now, because I think what you're doing also is sharing it with others, because I think there's a lot of parents who don't have those communities. Don't know those stories. The stories are the strength, and that's what this is, right? And so for you, the next level was what you did with this strength. So it's Pain to Power, but it's leading with love. And in just a few moments, after we offer you this commercial, in just a few moments, we are going to learn more about how you have been leading with love, because that is really how you and I connected. that was it. And so in just a few moments, we will come back. And before then, please take a moment to find out a little bit about my story into power, in that we are all experiencing different things. I am Brown Girl Interrupting, and I'm a blogger, and you're going to learn a little bit more about where I started writing and why. Hi, my name is Maria, but you are soon going to know me as Brown Girl Interrupting. And what I mean by that is that very soon, hopefully, you're going to be following my blog. I am a writer, and I started writing because I was married, I had children, and then my life changed when I separated, and I did a lot of learning and reflecting and growing in that process of change, because change always leads us to that. And I've decided to share that with the rest of the world, because sometimes hearing that someone else is going through the same thing as you, or understanding and putting words to the feelings and experiences we're having, helps us to heal from them, or grow from them, or learn from them. And so that's what my blog is. It's writing about life, healing, relationships, parenting, dating, marriage, pain, love, mistakes, growth, and coming out whole still in all of it as a human, flawed, but always open to new things. So that's my life, that's my journey, and it's written in this blog. But my hope is that you are going to go to www.browngirlinterrupting.com and join and subscribe to the blog and read all about my story to help you maybe gain some perspective on yours. All right, thank you. Okay, so again, technical difficulties, half a house of electricity, some of which is my outlets don't work. So I'm just going to let y'all know right now. I've got a lot of low battery messages. I moved to see if I could get some better situation here with my battery loading on my phone. So we're just going to see how it goes. If I disconnect, Amrita is going to tell you her story of leading with love because she's got a great story. So we're moving along, leading with love. And please go subscribe to my website. I have a new post that I just put out called You Might Win Some, and another one called Hunger that's a poem. So please go check it out. Put your email and subscribe. Okay, Amrita, leading with love. Tell us about Better Ed and what it is and what you are doing now to take the learning and the experience of what you experience with your son to help others understand what they can do to support their own children and others' children.
Sure. So just before getting to Better Ed, one thing on this journey that, kind of kept on popping up is how pervasive ableism is in our society. People who pass judgment, who just dismiss my son as soon as I say the word syndrome, people who pass comments about, oh, how your son will be okay. My son is okay. It's the ableism that really pushed me to want to make a change. How do we raise awareness around disabilities? It first made me think about my own biases and experiences around disability, and then effectively prompted me to launch the Better Ed Guide platform. So our logo has the term special ed, special being crossed out and being replaced with Better Ed, better being an acronym. Growing up in Brooklyn, kids with disabilities were othered into special ed. I was never mean to them, but nor did I dare to socialize with the group that was different. Fast forward to the present day, my daughter goes to a great independent school in the area, but I realized her and her peers will likely have very limited interactions with kids with disabilities just by the nature of the student body at that school. By the time these kids reach middle or high school, they're going to have certain stigmas or biases about people with disabilities, just like their parents have, or I did, growing up, really just given their lack of education around the topic. So Better Ed Guide enables schools and families to create awareness around understanding disabilities. We do this through a couple of different ways. We do this through professional development workshops. So educating teachers and having them have a sense of their perhaps implicit biases around disabilities, and also through curricular integration. So, for example, when we teach the kids about the 5 senses, why don't we also teach them about, well, what if you didn't have one of the 5 senses? Or when we first teach kids about the ABCs, let's introduce the concept of ASL, American Sign Language. So it's naturally part of their vernacular, right? So they think of it as no different, but just a different way of communicating. When we learn about the civil rights movement, why don't we talk about the civil rights movement as relates to the disability civil rights movement? There's so much intersectionality between the two, and just so much intersectionality between historically marginalized groups. So this platform is really there to educate and to hopefully, raise awareness so that we have a more informed and kinder place for kids like my son and others. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
And
I
that's
read,
oh, go ahead.
no, sorry, I was just going to say, I read somewhere that ableism remains among the last broadly socially accepted forms of discrimination. When Brown versus Board of Education came out, right? So Brown versus Board of Topeka, Kansas. In one of the briefs, the Board of Education was like, well, if we integrate the schools with the Black children and the white children, they're going to expect us to integrate kids with disabilities next. I mean, this ableism is just so deeply rooted in our society. So anyways, this is just a way to hopefully get the word out and to educate and to have a more inclusive and kinder society.
I love that. And kinder society is so important because, I think so much of what again, I've been trying to capture through the show is just that, is it's the humanity behind everything. Every story has human experiences, and children and adults are different, right, in their human experience, and particularly children. I think, we're talking about the school system, we're talking about kids, and not given space of just seeing people as individuals rather than seeing them as labels is so huge in so many different ways. And you mentioned intersectionality, and I know you and I have talked about it, is that there's an intersection of that in race. There's an of ableism in gender. There's an intersection of that within socioeconomic status, right? Like so many different elements that impact and in that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And then Josh says, and his family members and not cases. Exactly. Like, and so I will say, and this is a kudos to you because you literally just launched how long ago?
Oh gosh, about 15 months ago we launched. We launched, and we piloted the program at a school in the area. And honestly, Maria, just even the tidbits and the feedback I got from so we piloted at it with a PK, so 4 and 5 year olds, right? A PK class in the area, and I'm trying to think of some examples that they shared. And as I would get some anecdotes from the teacher, and we would have monthly calls. But one thing she was sharing was they had a question for the kids, like, how do you show peace without language? And the kid said, well, you can't use sign language because that's a language. These are 4 and 5 year olds that recognize that sign language is a language, and you can't, that's a way of communicating. They're 4 and 5. There was another one where, how do you see the light in the darkness of winter? The kids were asked that. And they said, well, even if you're blind, you can feel the sun on your face. Even blind people can see. I mean, again, these are 4 and 5 year olds recognizing that. I think a lot of adults wouldn't be able to put that together. So I think that it's never too early to start educating, our kids, again, even at that age. And I think, a lot of us have just been, socialized to don't stare, don't ask questions, it's impolite to stare. But we have to encourage the kids to ask questions. How else are they going to learn? There's a way to ask questions, right? There's a way to be polite about things, but there's etiquette around this. And as long as we're open to educating ourselves, I mean, I've learned so much about etiquette and even just the variances within the different disability communities that are out there. And, my learning curve has been steep, for the last, couple of years since the diagnosis. But as long as you're willing to learn, you're going to hopefully give back and spread the word. There's so much joy I get from my son. I know that every mom says that, but my son, I call my daughter my heart. It sounds cheesy. I call my daughter my heart because I didn't know my capacity for love until I held her for the first time. Right, she's the older one, and I call my son my blessing because I truly think of God, given everything we've been through with him. Remember, we were in the car one day, and this must have been about a year ago. So he was 3. And I said to him, I thank God for my J blessings. His name starts with J. I'm like, thank God for my J blessings. And he says, Mama, you have S blessings too. My daughter's name starts with S. And it's like, you're 3. You're schooling me. But the fact that he could put those connections together, I think he has a higher social emotional IQ than certainly my daughter does. But all to say that we're often blinded by what we don't know. That of course is ignorance, and hopefully this platform will enlighten people going forward.
I love that you said like that last line, being blinded by what we don't know, because I think what you just mentioned in terms of like those pre-K kids, right, 4 and 5-year-olds, is that's it, right? Like you've allowed curiosity to be a good thing with learning at the same time, right? Like it's an opportunity to expand their understanding of things, not to shut things down, not to stop them from wondering.
Right.
And that is so powerful and so important, because again, like as adults, there's so many adults who don't have those 2 qualities, right? Or who aren't willing to have those 2 qualities, because once we get to certain ages, we normalize things as the one way of being, and we miss opportunities. We miss
for sure.
that, right?
For
So
sure. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. I've been doing so much reading and research in the space, but I forget which bank it was, but it was one of the global banks that they did a case study, and they realized someone, for example, this is just an example, but like let's just say someone who's autistic, this individual might be really good at math, right? And the role that you want at the bank is someone who's super quantitative and is good at math. This person may lack the social skills to interview with you, but they'd be really good at the job. What ends up happening, right, is that the person that's the fast talker that can sell themselves ends up getting the job because people need that connection. What they don't realize is it's not about the connection per se, right? But who's going to do that job the best? Who's going to be the most efficient at that job? That job's not about socialization per se. It's about, getting those numbers out or whatever. So there is a big missed opportunity in so many different ways. And the other thing, the flip side, there's so much that the disability community has given us meaning the broader society, that we don't even realize. So I'm going to date myself, but remember LP records, right? Like back in the day, record player, LP records. Those were the first form of audiobooks for people who were blind. It wasn't until 10 years later they started putting music on them for the masses, or even kind of more modern to bring things to light. Elevators in the metro stations, right? I mean, by law, you need to have accessibility. I can count on probably one hand how many people in a wheelchair I've seen use those elevators relative to the elderly, people with strollers, people with push carts. So, arguably, it's this idea of universal design, having accessibility really for all. It's not just about the disability community.
but when you recognize and you're intentional about it being inclusive of individuals that are not able to access things the most, you're able to then create those opportunities for everyone, right? Like
Absolutely.
just said, right? That like being able to make things accessible for our individuals who are disabled or are challenged in their physical abilities to manage things or navigate, they now have access, but also a mom stroller or
Right.
some bike, right? Like somebody who's on crutches, right? Like there's so many different ways, right, that we have now expanded opportunity and access to people. And that the work that I do is in race and equity, and this is the core and foundation of being intentional about the way we do things. And recognizing personality means recognizing all of the differences that we have in our existence and our identity. So before we close out and we start to get towards the end here, I want to know, and I'm going to bring it back. I know that this is you shy away from the Amrita conversations, but Amrita, experienced this, and Amrita has created this, and Amrita has brought a lot of people along the journey with her. And I will say, I'm going to count myself in this journey with you too, because I feel like you have expanded my understanding as an educator, and you have expanded my understanding as a mother, and just, you know, widened my lens and gave me the opportunity to share your story, which I truly appreciate. Because being in the third trimester and having this business and so many other things, this is a lot. And like, I'm so grateful for your time and for your story to be shared. But for me, like, I really want to know, like, what have you learned about yourself? You know, what are your strengths that have come out for you personally, and what are the things that maybe you didn't know about yourself that came out through this, that are things that you've battled with or are continuing to battle with?
Those are really good questions. I mean, I know it sounds a little cliche, but you don't ever really know your strength until it's tested. And I've been tested. I have to go back to my mom again. You know, I mean, I started appreciating her after my daughter, but this whole journey is, I never saw my mom as a role model. I know that sounds terrible. We just were so different. I was just so different growing up. I don't know, Maria. I think, you know, for me, I've always been a positive person. It's just the way we were raised, or just knowing that, you know what, in the darkest moment, there's always a silver lining, and holding on to that. And, you know, yeah, you might, you know, feel like you're losing yourself, or you're not making, you know, you don't have that financial independence, but it's okay to let go. It's hard to let go, right? It's hard to let go of your life. It's hard to let go of that freedom, in a sense. But sometimes you're being tested or tasked by someone, you know, a higher power, to let go for bigger and better and greater things. You know, what was my, I mean, I had a fun life, you know, jet setting around the world, and I had that financial freedom, and I could, you know, buy stuff and then think about it and all that great stuff. But for what? You know, my husband and I actually often talk about how we started having kids, we had kids later on in life as opposed to earlier. And what's better, like living it up in your 20s and 30s and then having kids, or having them earlier? And, you know, you had your kids early. So I know we have a different, you know, experience in terms of when we had kids. But for me, it's so much more fulfilling, the life I lead now. And what Better Ed, even in this, you know, kind of year, 15 months or so, has given me. So I think that's one thing I've learned is, you know, nothing is what it seems, in a sense. There's that quote by Maya Angelou about the light. Something about how, you know, nothing can dim the light that's within. And my light has been fueled by my parents, my ancestors, really all the people on this journey, even those who passed ableist comments. They've all provided the clarity and the direction needed for change, to lead with love. And I think we might have lost Maria, but thanks for everyone who joined us tonight, and I'm sure she'll be back soon.
My world has slowly crumbled around me countless times, and every time I rebuild with the pieces I've been given to birth something so transformational and beautiful that no one else knew might exist before it was shown to them. These moments tend to coincide within my romantic path. the universe has been telling me to focus on the revolution and not romance. It has over time given me the tools, resilience, and light to turn my pain into power. And only now do I see that the key to this always resided in the love and knowing I had in myself, not from the external sources of family or men. The message I have been avoiding might be that my time in this world I had existed in was not to receive love, but to put it out there for others to see, feel, and heal through. Revolution before romance moves pain into power.